Hi everybody. So this is the second part of an introduction to developing with embedded systems, Internet of Things, IoT devices. And in our first section, we looked at how to install Ubuntu into a virtual machine. So there'll be a link to that in the description below the video here. So if you need to go through that or you want to go through that, please do. You don't need to run inside a virtual machine unless you particularly want to. But if you want to do what I'm doing here, then I suggest that you may want to have a look at that. So I've got my my Ubuntu virtual machine configured up. We're just booting that up now inside VirtualBox. Won't take too long. And there we go. Let's just log in. And we're now running our development system, if you like. So the first thing we're going to do is find the instructions for Espressif's ESP-IDF toolchain. And the reason for this is that I'm doing a lot of work here with these lovely ESP8266 and ESP32 parts. They're cheap as chips. They're becoming quite ubiquitous now. There's all manner of interesting little IoT devices that you can work with. Some people are working with the Arduino toolchain, which is a great way of getting started, great way of doing things. I find that the ESP-IDF is kind of a more powerful way of going about doing things. So let's have a look at how we go and install that. You can look through all of this, getting started at espressif.com, ESP-IDF, lots of stuff about boards. We can talk about, what kind of boards you might want to use, but basically, just a vanilla ESP32 is going to be usable here with what I'm doing. I also tend to use a lot of M5 stack boards that you can take a look at. If you look at M5 stack here, beautiful little things, around 30 quid, 50 quid, something like that. And some have displays and some have more or less RAM, more or less storage, and you can connect sensors into them. You can do all manner of interesting things. So that's pretty cool. So let's scroll ahead and let's get this installation underway. You can run under Windows if you want, or Mac. I tend to do everything with Linux these days, so that's how we're going to be doing things here. If we open up shell, and let's get going with this. Let's make the ESP directory, and let's grab the ESP-IDF. Now we might find that I haven't installed these tools actually, indeed. So what we're going to have to do is step back to installation. That's quite interesting. So it doesn't tell us what basic things we might need for this. So what we will do is, we know that we can use apt-get to install build essential. Never know if this is plural or singular. There we go. So basically build essential is a sort of meta package that pulls in all the other bits and pieces that we might need for building software. If I recollect correctly, then that's also gonna pull in Git, but we might need to explicitly install that. So while this is going, please go make yourself a cup of coffee or something, and we will scroll forward to where this is done for you. Okay, so build essential installed. There's some nice basic stuff like GCC for compiling. Do we have Git? We haven't got Git, so let's install Git as well. Git is basically a software configuration management, or SCM tool, which has been around for a while nowadays. A lot of people use it, particularly in the open source community. Up on the internet in the cloud, we have what are called repositories. We have Git repositories, and so the ESP-IDF code or framework or build system that we want is in this ESP-IDF.git repository on GitHub. So we are going to try and grab that into our ESP-IDF folder. Now, there are different versions of the ESP-IDF toolchain, and at this stage, what we could do is to grab a particular version, but all I'm doing here is I'm just grabbing the latest and greatest version. So that's pretty much fine for what we need. So again, that's going to take a little while. Make yourself comfortable while we zip forward and let this finish downloading and checking itself out. Okay, so that took a little while. And what I should have mentioned is that when we did our git clone to check out the ESP-IDF framework, we use this recursive option, and that's pretty important. And if you're used to Git, you might have kind of skipped ahead of that and not used that. That would be a problem, because recursive is basically going through a load of other Git repos that are contained within this ESP-IDF repo to pull in all of these various different components that we now have. And what's really nice about the ESP-IDF is that it's got a really fully featured set of components, from MQTT to JSON to embed TLS to OpenThread to all sorts of bits and pieces that you can use here. It's also a well-defined and extensible framework, so that you can pretty easily add in your own components as you go along, which is all really pretty nice. So that's checked out now. The next thing we need to do is to understand how to set up our environment. So if I just change back to my home directory, which is just my my login here, if we look at setting up the tools, what we need to do is to run this installation script. So let's do that, and let's install for the ESP32, because that's what I care about. And the next thing this is doing now is it's pulling down a set of compilation tool chains. The ESP32 architecture is an extensor core architecture. So we need compilation tools, GCC, etc., that can compile for that target architecture, so that we can build binaries and flash binaries into little devices and run things up and all that good stuff. So again, let's let that download and install, and we'll scroll ahead. Okay, interesting problem. Because I'm doing everything from scratch here to make sure that we don't have any problems with missing dependencies, we have indeed found a missing dependency. We need virtual env. So let's make sure that we have that installed. I'm going to go to apt and install virtual env. Okay, so that's installed, and I'm now going to rerun the installation script for ESP32. And that's looking better, isn't it? So that seems to be doing what it needs to be doing. Lovely. So we've installed the toolchain that we need under the ESP-IDF. And the last thing that we need to do here now is to set up our paths so that we can actually start doing some interesting things. And the way that we do that is to run this export script. So with the preceding dot, note there's a dot and a space and then a /export.sh. That will source the export script, which sets everything up that we need set up. That now has got us to the point where we can run the ESP-IDF idf.py command, which is how we do everything on the command line to build Espressif applications. So if I just double check that we do have access to that, oh, if I could spell correctly, and indeed there you are, it's accessible, but we have another dependency that's missing, which we didn't install, so it's quite a good thing that we're doing all this from scratch. So let's install CMake. CMake is a kind of a make tool. Well, it's perhaps inherent in the name, and a lot of what the Espressif system is based around is CMake files. So you'll see a lot of CMake information underneath the ESP-IDF. And if you want to get into making your own components, then that's something that's sort of worth looking up. Okay, so that's installed. Now let's try running our ESP-IDF.py again. Ta-da! We got a load of stuff that we can do here. Last thing we want to do is I want that accessible whenever I run up a shell. So I use my editor to edit bash rc, which is the setup script for bash shells. And what I'm going to do is export my path to contain the home directory ESP. Actually, that's not what I want to do. What I want to do is to source the ESP-IDF export.sh file. Let's just make a little note that we're setting up ESP-IDF, and let's just double check that I've got that right. If I do that, copy, paste, yep, that works okay. If I exit my shell and I reopen my shell, you can see that that's run the tool and we have access to it. Okay, so I think we're going to leave that there. And then what we'll do in the next section is I want to look at both creating command line projects and then also we're going to look at a rather nice graphical tool called platform.io that we can use to kind of wrap all of this cool command line stuff and make it a little bit more accessible with a nice graphical user interface. So hopefully that was useful to you, and I'll see you in the next installation.